Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Plant Consciousness Live. This afternoon, it's my great pleasure to have with us here in discussion the incredible John Perkins. Many of you may well know John from his work with Pachamama Alliance, or maybe from his best-selling book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking to John a little bit about both of those and some of the other books he's written and the work that he's doing. So good afternoon to you, John.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here with you.
So first of all, let me just ask you a little bit about your background. Obviously, many people will know the book that you've written, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, but perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about the work that you did there and then what led you to your time in the Amazon.
Well, actually, my time in the Amazon really precedes that economic hitman stuff. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 1968 for 3 years, living with the Shuar people who, if you've ever seen a shrunken head or a picture of one, they did it. They're the only people who do. And incidentally, that's a very sacred ceremony. It isn't the gory thing that we present it to be. That's a long story. I'll maybe share that when I'm there at the workshop. But so I was with them for 3 years, from 68 to 71, and then later became an economic hitman. And I've written 5 books on indigenous people, which are my favorite books. None of them have sold as big as Confessions of an Economic Hitman, so that's the one that's better known. But I like The World is As You Dream It, and Shapeshifting, and Psychonavigation, and the ones on shamanism. That's my favorite.
Yeah, for me, actually, the first time I really came across you was through your book, The World is As You Dream It, and that's what actually inspired me to invite you to be one of the keynote presenters at our forthcoming Plant Consciousness event, which is taking place in London in October. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on and your role in that. But perhaps if you could just give us a little bit more of the backstory of what you discovered down in the Amazon and how you came into contact with the plant kingdom and you know, what inspired you to initiate the Pachamama Alliance.
Well, first of all, back when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I was sent in to form credit and savings co-ops because I just graduated from business school and very quickly discovered that there was no way the Shuar were going to form credit and savings co-ops. They had no currency. They had no money. Everything was barter. So I very quickly learned that I had absolutely nothing to teach these people, but they had a great deal to teach me about relationship, especially. Relationship with, yes, the plants, and with the animals, and with the rocks, and with the rivers, and with each other, stuff that we just don't learn in our schools, you know. And then I got very, very sick at one point. I lost a tremendous amount of weight. I was dying, and there was no way I could get out. I was a 2-day walk from the nearest road, and then another 2 days of horrible roads and awful buses up to the nearest doctor. But a shaman came along, an old man who offered to heal me. And I have to admit, you know, I was very, very skeptical. I'd heard of witch doctors. This is 1968. I didn't know a thing about shamanism. And what he did was give me ayahuasca that night. I had this amazing ayahuasca ceremony. I had no idea what was happening, what I was taking. It was scary as all get out at the very beginning. I had no idea what was going on. But in that ceremony, I saw that I had been raised to be extremely hygienic by my parents and raised in rural New Hampshire on very, very boring foods, meat and potatoes basically. And suddenly here I was living with people who eat live grubs coming out of trees. They drink something called chicha, which is a kind of beer made by women chewing and spitting the manioc plant. And I was eating and drinking these things because there weren't any Cliff Bars. You know, that's all there was. But I saw on this ayahuasca journey that every time I ate these things and drank this, some voice, probably my mother's, would shout in my ears, "Son, it'll kill you." And yet I also saw that the Shuar people were extremely healthy. The men are built like Rambo. They carry, you know, huge weights around and out of the forest. The women are sexy and amazing. I was, you know, in my early 20s, I was really impressed with the women. And they were eating and drinking these substances. So I realized that one night on that plant taught me that it was not the food or the drink that was killing me, it was a mindset. And in that one night, I changed my mindset. And I ended up spending the next 3 years with these people, and as a price for healing me, the shaman demanded that I become his apprentice. I had no interest in doing that at the time, but I had no choice, and it totally changed my life forever. It was one of the best experiences, perhaps the pivotal experience of my life, to be trained in the use of the plants and all the other various aspects of shamanism.
And obviously, following on from that, you must have gone back to the US. And then, how did you integrate what you had been shown in the jungle through the mother vine? And then, at what point did you decide to write about your experiences and start taking other people back to the Amazon so you could share that incredible indigenous wisdom with them as well?
I'll try to keep the story short, David. Yeah, I graduated from business school, and while I was still in the Peace Corps, I was recruited by this big consulting firm called Charles T. Main in Boston, where I eventually became chief economist there, better known as an economic hitman. But in all honesty, what I thought I was doing was good stuff at the beginning. I didn't realize that what we were doing was ripping off the rest of the world. I was doing what I'd been trained to do in business school, where we're taught is the right thing to do to help developing countries develop. That's another long story. But suffice it to say that probably because of my experience in the Peace Corps, I was one of the few people in that business who really got to see the dark side. And once again, the plant helped me. I did go back to Ecuador. I did do more of the plant ceremonies, and I saw the truth behind what was going on. So I was only in that business for 10 years, and I saw the really dark side of it and realized I had to get out of it and eventually expose it. And once I got out of it, I went back into the Amazon. I went back to the people who'd changed my life, saved my life, and said, hey, I want to help you save your rainforest because I know they're under attack. And they, in their inevitable way, said, well, that's fantastic, but if you want to save these rainforests, don't try to change us, change your people. It's your oil companies, your lumber companies, your cattle ranchers that are destroying these forests, and most of all, it's your dream of the world. A dream of deep materialism, big buildings, lots of cars, heavy industry. Go back to your people and change their dream. So I did. I came back and formed a nonprofit called Dream Change, began writing books, doing workshops. Out of Dream Change grew the Pachamama Alliance, and out of that the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, and it goes on and on. But the whole story really is about changing the dream, and that's one of the things the plants teach us so beautifully and so sweetly and suavely and lovingly.
That's very true, and certainly my own experiences with plants have yielded the same kind of results and shown perhaps a different way for us to live in harmony. With the event that we have you over for in London in October, we've coined the name Plant Consciousness for that. Actually, that was something that was given to me in a meditation, meditating with a nettle plant, which is interesting in itself. But I'd like to ask you what your perception of plant consciousness means. What does it mean to you? Do you think that there is a higher intelligence, not just of plants, the psychoactive plants like Mother Ayahuasca and Grandfather Peyote and these other kind of plants, but all plants? Is there something that's much deeper that we can actually connect to and learn from?
There's no question, David. I mean, I absolutely, and you know, I will talk a lot more about this in the programs that I do, especially the workshop, where there's really 4 types of plants I think that most indigenous cultures respect, and they're all teachers. One type teaches us about beauty, aesthetics, you know, the decorative plants. Another type teaches us about nutrition, the plants we eat. They're incredible teachers if we just listen. And another type about healing, about medicine, the medicinal plants. And then there's the plants that teach us about spirituality, about our deep connection with everything else. And that's the sacred plants. That's that other level of consciousness. You know, the ayahuasca, the datura, the sacred tobacco, and so on and so forth. But all of these plants have these amazing qualities to teach us if we just tune in. And one of the things that I realized living in the Amazon with the indigenous people is how incredibly in touch with the plants they are, how they listen to them. Everybody listens to them. The women who sing to Nunqui, the goddess of the earth, when they dig up the yucca, which is a staple of their lives, they always sing to the earth and praise her and thank her. And feel the consciousness of that plant. So it isn't just the shamans and what we think of as sort of these sacred plants. All the plants to them are sacred, and they all speak to us. They all have a deep, deep consciousness, and we better listen to it. It's important.
For sure, and one of the aims of the event that we're organising is actually to show people, you know, in this country, in the British Isles, and in fact any other countries that people are attending the event from, that we all have these incredible plants outside of us, maybe growing in our garden. Some people, you know, see some plants like dandelions and nettles simply as weeds, and yet they have an incredible amount of wisdom and knowledge they can offer us if we just spend time to actually engage with them. And I think this is really one of the cornerstones of what we're trying to do, and why it's so important to us that you're able to come to London and talk about your experiences in the jungle, and then relate it back out to a global perspective, which we can then take again down to the microcosm level, and allow people to go out into the world and find their own connection with the plant kingdom. So I'd like to move on actually to something else I wanted to talk to you about, which is really the Pachamama Alliance, which you just alluded to a little bit about there. What are you doing with the Alliance now? What's the core work that you're involved with Pachamama Alliance?
Well, the Pachamama Alliance came out of the early 90s when I was working with the Shuar. I'd gone back to the people I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer with. I was helping them, or they were helping me, I guess, more than anything. And a message came from the Achua. Now, when I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer in the late 60s with the Shuar, the Achua were officially uncontacted. They're the next tribe further out. And I used to say to my Shuar friends, I want to be the first white man to really get to know the Achua. And they used to say, no, you don't. They're our enemies. You don't want to go there. Well, they made contact in the early 70s, and now they're our partners. And I was just there. I just came back a couple of days ago. I was there for 3 weeks with the Pachamama Alliance. A message came from the Achua through me. It really came from the jungle, through the Achua, and then to me. And the message was, you know, if you want to save these forests, in fact, if you want to work together, basically to save humanity as we know it on this planet, then come here, learn from the plants, learn from us, and let's work together to change the dream. And they really believe that everything is about the dream, that we can't do anything unless we first dream it. You know, I couldn't turn on this computer unless I first had the dream, the mental image that I wanted to turn on the computer and can turn on the computer, and then I send that image to my body and I push a button and on comes the computer. But everything starts with the dream, and we need to realize this. And the plants are so good at helping us learn to dream. And it isn't just by ingesting what many people think of as hallucinogenic plants. And incidentally, to me, they're not hallucinogenics. Hallucinogen is something that removes you from reality, like television. These plants take you into a deeper reality. They are indeed sacred teachers. And, you know, just last week, while I was deep in the Amazon with the Achua, and I was with a group of about 25 people from the Pachamama Alliance that I was co-leading with my co-founders, Bill and Lynn Twist and Daniel Cooperman. And one of the people on the trip asked a shaman, we were sitting in his lodge, and they said, so, you know, what do we do to change the dream, to change this world? And he said, come with me. And he stood up and he led us outside and took us on a little walk into the forest. And then he stopped and he said, now, each one of you, go off on your own to a different part of this forest and sit for a moment, and you ask these plants what it is that you each need to do as an individual. This isn't always a generic answer, what do we do? It's a specific personal answer. Each of you go off, ask these plants. And people did. And they get remarkable, remarkable answers. And they were very individualized. You know, for example, mine is about writing and lecturing. Someone else who had a great deal of money, made a lot of money in business, it was about helping use that money to get out to the media, to get the message out. So everyone got a different message, but everyone got a really strong message from the forest, from the plants themselves.
I think that's absolutely amazing, and one of the reasons that the book that you wrote, The World is As You Dream It, really struck a chord with me is it fitted so well with so many other different types of spiritual teachings that I've come across and had studied, and the idea that actually everything around us is our creation, and that one of the most important steps we have to take is actually realizing this and actually then taking full individual responsibility for everything that happens in our immediate environment. And perhaps if more of us did that, then the world would be different. So my question to you on this particular theme is, with the knowledge that you have working with the Shuar and other tribes in South America, and working with plants like Mother Ayahuasca, what potential do you see there to be for a new way of living, a new way of existing, a new global kind of paradigm, if you like, that actually sees us living in harmony with all plants, with all aspects of nature?
Yes, and I think that it's fair to say that I believe we're in the greatest revolution in human history. bigger than the agricultural or industrial revolutions. This is a revolution in consciousness. And a lot of it has come with our renewed understanding, really a renaissance, a reawakening. We're coming out of what we might call the dark ages of a corporate trance. And we're reawakening to the incredible power of nature and of the plant world and of the four physical elements, the fifth element, which all indigenous cultures call by some specific name, which is really when the four physical elements come together, and they often do it through plants to create the fifth element, which is the consciousness element. And I'll be doing a lot with that in the upcoming program in London in October. And so we're really coming to this understanding that we are awakening to the fact that we have created a failed system on this planet. It's just not working. It's not sustainable. We know that. We know we have to change it. We have to change the dream that we've created in the past. It's brought us some great things, some amazing art and music and technologies. We understand a lot more about our planet and the universe than we ever did, but it's gone too far. And now we need to change that. So we're waking up to this. And the plants are playing a huge role in this. And I would say that many of the shamanic cultures that I've worked with, the Mayan culture in Central America, the Tibetan cultures, some of the Bedouin cultures of the deserts of the Middle East, do not use what we would call the teacher plants in terms of ayahuasca, what we call hallucinogenic. And as I said, I don't like the term, but for lack of a better one, they don't use these at all. But they still have an incredibly deep relationship with the plants. Mm-hmm. And so there's many different ways to develop that relationship and to recognize that it's always about the spirit of the plants. It isn't about their chemical composition. It's about the spirits. They all speak with a spirit. And in most indigenous cultures, every plant spirit has a name. Nunkwi, the earth; Sunki, the water that's in the plant; Shakaim, which is the great spirit of the forest, so on and so forth. These plants have amazing spirit and amazing intelligence. And I'm so glad that we're waking up to really listen.
Yeah, definitely. We also believe the same thing. And actually, one of the things that I find personally interesting about what is going on, particularly with the very sacred teacher plants, is that almost unanimously all of their actual environments, their natural habitats, are all being threatened, whether it's ayahuasca in the Amazon, whether it's the peyote in the Wirakuta that's being threatened by the big mining operations, whether it's the iboga root from Gabon. All of these plants, all of their natural habitats are under a huge threat right now, and it seems to me that they're almost forcing themselves into Western consciousness to make us really aware that there is something much deeper at work and that we have to face up to that. And when I interviewed Simon Powell recently, who's also one of the other speakers at Plant Consciousness, who's done a lot of work with the psilocybin mushroom, he made an interesting comment, actually, which I think bears relevance to this point. He said if you go back to the time of the Aztecs and the Mayans, they almost certainly used psilocybin mushrooms, and it's easy to get caught up in the idea that sometimes the use of these plants makes it something like a sacred activity. And he said back in those times, they were people that were sacrificing other human individuals for whatever reasons. And he said that he believes at that moment in time that was one of the pertinent issues of that era, of that time. And one of the reasons he thinks now that there's so much interest in working with the plants is that we as a race of people somewhere in our subconscious realize that we're actually killing the planet. And so many people are now seeking out plants like ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms and peyote to have a deeper experience with nature and to actually see what's going on. And so that the experiences they are having are all kind of being reflected back in very much in the sense of like we need to really honor nature and to honor the plants. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. My friend and neighbor, Paul Stamets, does a lot of work with mushrooms. You probably know him. And he lives not too far from me, and there's a new film that is being made by another friend of mine about him, and Paul has done some amazing research and concluded that human beings learn to make fire because of the plants, because it's probably psilocybin, and he sees how today chimpanzees will eat mushrooms, and sometimes they're eating them in connection with other plants, and he has no doubt, and from looking at cave drawings, from looking at so many other things, that a great deal of our intelligence, how to create fire, how to build houses, how to build dugout canoes, so on and so forth, came directly from that experience with the plant world back, many years ago when we were when we were just beginning to walk on 2 legs instead of 4, that the plants have always had a huge impact on our knowledge, and for sure, this is happening again now. There's really good reason why all this is happening. You know, I'll talk in the workshop about some of the prophecies that talk about how this is the time for the eagle and the condor to come together, for the indigenous people to come together with the scientific peoples, and that's happening so strongly. And it's for good reason, because when you combine the knowledge that we have scientifically with the knowledge that the plant world has, and the knowledge of the intuitive side, the knowledge of the condor side, the heart side, when you combine these two and you really allow them to wed, to marriage, to create a new life form, which is a higher state of consciousness, then something very, very special happens, and it's happening now. It's happening in a big way, and it's going to escalate, hopefully very fast. I think, and it is happening very fast.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way to us, and indeed, if you go back even further into time, there are many kind of theories abounding at the moment that perhaps the sacred soma plant, which was written a lot about in the Indian subcontinent many thousands of years ago, might possibly have either been a native variation of the ayahuasca plant, or possibly even the psilocybin mushroom, and that perhaps a lot of the spiritual ideas that came out from the time of Buddha and from some of the ancient Vedic texts may well have been inspired by the use of plants in those periods as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that, and a lot of evidence that the things that Homer wrote about and the ancient classical writers, the Elysian fields and so on and so forth, it was all about plants. You know, it was about this other state of consciousness, and you know, I think it's a sign of our times that what we call our scientific community has tried to suppress this during the past 100 years or so, but now that's changing. And you know, it's significant, David, that on these trips that I now do with the Pachamama Alliance, like the one I just did, we have a lot of medical doctors coming on these trips. We have quantum physicists coming on these trips. We have extremely successful business people coming on these trips. Back in the 90s, when I started taking people on these kinds of trips in the early 90s, you know, it was basically, you know, the only people that signed up were what we might call, you know, hippies, or old hippies, or retiring hippies, or young hippies, or whatever. But today, it's across the board. Everybody's interested. There's, you know, yeah, sure, there's still some resistance out there, but it's just become such a broad spectrum, and thank goodness for that. You know, things really are changing. We are having a revolution in consciousness, and the plants are our leaders in that revolution.
Yes, and this brings me to kind of the final point I'd really like to touch on with you this afternoon is we're at a tipping point, or it seems that we're at a tipping point, and yet I speak to so many people that look in, you know, they watch the news and they see the desperation in the world. I know you've talked about this many times yourself on other videos to do with, or other interviews to do with your economic hitman stuff, but how close do you think we are to a tipping point where we can actually start to embrace a new way of being and overthrow the death economies of the sort of Western capitalist consumer way of doing things?
It's happening.
Yeah, what do you think it's going to, you know, take for that to be really, you know, the new world which we're going to live in, possibly?
Well, I think it's happening. You know, I've been on a constant road trip around the world since Confessions of an Economic Hitman came out about 10 years ago. And I've seen huge changes in those 10 years. In places like business schools and law schools, I've seen a huge change of attitude. And across the board, in every country, everywhere, people are really waking up. Business students are waking up. Executives are waking up. The tipping point is here. We're getting it. And, you know, 10 years really isn't a very long time. It seems like a long time when we're down in the trenches. But it really isn't. It's a short time. It's a blink in history. And David, I just want to add one thing, that in the programs that I'll be doing in the workshop and so forth, one of the things I like to take people into is being able to assess the power, the knowledge, the wisdom, the energy of plants without actually ingesting them, but by envisioning them, by visualizing them. Because what we realize, and I've got a good friend who's a professor at MIT and studies the chemistry of dreams. And you know, he points out that when we dream, our whole chemistry changes in our brains, and the receptors change. The same thing happens when we take some of these sacred plants, but we can also induce that by visualizing these plants, by bringing them into our system in a spiritual way. It's wonderful to take them physically. I'm not in any way denigrating that in the least bit, but I would say that many times we can't do that. And for example, at business meetings, I will go into these states when I need to make a decision. I can't take a plant when I'm saying, I can't even let anybody know I'm doing it, but I can access that, and that's one of the things I like to teach people. It's one of the takeaways in the workshops that I do, is that we can go into that state through a visualization process, through connecting with the spirits of the plants. It doesn't always have to be the physical contact with the plants.
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction to make. And actually, with the Plant Consciousness Conference, we actually have several different people showing different methodologies that don't involve ingestion. For example, we have Stefan from the Bark Center, who use flower essence remedies which don't actually contain any part of the flower in them at all. And then also Pam Montgomery, who's a plant spirit healer, who will also be showing us ways to sit in nature and actually form relationships or plant spirit allies with very common native plants that you might find in your own garden, and showing us that we don't necessarily have to ingest them either. So I think it's really interesting that you're going to be adding to that mix and actually showing us from your own experience as well how we can access that higher state. So perhaps if you could just give us a very short explanation about what you'll be presenting on the one-day conference of Plant Consciousness, and then the very exciting shape-shifting workshop you're going to be doing the following day as well.
Well, it'll really be, in the lecture part, I'll be talking about some of these things, but in the workshop, and as much as possible throughout, what I will do is help people experience, because there's no substitute for experience. So how do we experience these plants? How do we experience them physically, in connection with them that way? How do we experience them when they're not even available to us physically, but they are always available to us spiritually? How do we connect with that? So I'll be doing some talking, but more than anything, especially during the workshop, it'll be deeply experiential, where people will be going deep into these processes. And my goal always is not just to have an experience during that time in the workshop, but to have people really understand how they can continue to connect and use these processes after they leave. I think that's an incredibly important part of it.
Yeah, for sure. We like to make our events as experiential as possible, because it seems to us in the modern world that if people were to go away and really have value from spending a weekend of their very busy lives attending events such as ours, that they need to take tools back with them that they can then use themselves in their daily lives, where they're faced with all of the normal difficulties and challenges that we all have to deal with in the various lives that we lead. And so it's really important that people get that experiential value, and I'm so pleased that you're going to be doing that at your workshop.
Well, I would just add, David, that my mentors, my teachers are the plants, and they don't chatter a lot. They don't stand up and lecture. They take you through the process, and that's what I intend to do. That they are my teachers, and I follow them. They're my mentors. It's an experiential process. It's not so much a verbal one, although because we're human, we do use some explanations, but mainly it's just going into that deep connection, that deep experience.
And actually, just in addition to the weekend, which we've just made live in the last couple of days, you will also be participating and attending the Be the Change Symposium, which is an offshoot of your Up to Us program from the Pachamama Alliance. Can you just give us a couple of words about what that initiative is all about, and what are the aims of that program and that symposium?
Well, we discovered a long time ago, in fact the plants told us a long time ago, that you can't just go to the Amazon and fight the oil companies or work with the oil companies to try to change that, to try to save the forest. We have to change the dream of people around the world. So we developed a program called the Awakening the Dreamer program, which is now in over 80 countries, to help people really wake up. And then we realized that the next step was not just to wake up the dreamer, but to take the dreamer up along the next step, which is the Up to Us step, which is really getting involved, because what we know, as I said before, we have to have the dream, and then we have to apply energy, whether it's turning on a computer or changing the world. First, we start with awakening the dreamer, and then we have to actually take physical actions. We have to direct energy toward changing that dream, and that's something that the plants teach. It's something that the indigenous people take. So with Pachamama Alliance, that's the step we're into now, is to really help people understand that it is up to us, and that we have the power, we have the energy, we have the ability to change this dream. So we lead people through a process that helps them understand what each of them can do individually.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you this afternoon, John, and just to let all of the viewers know a little bit more about the weekend which we're referring to. It's the Plant Consciousness Weekend. It's taking place in London on the weekend of the 3rd to the 6th of October. John will be with us all weekend, which is great. It's really a big honour to have him spend so much time with us in London, because he's a busy guy, and as he said, he's been on a 10-year road trip with the economic Hitman stuff. So it's really a very special opportunity for us and people attending the event to listen to John and spend time with him. All the details for that event or the weekend of events can be found on plantconsciousness.com. John's also going to be giving a talk about his economic Hitman stuff on the Monday night in London as well. Yeah, all information can be found at the website plantconsciousness.com, or indeed on the Facebook page with the same name. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this afternoon, John. Very much looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks in London, and yeah, and hanging out with you and listening to all of your wonderful stories and your inspirational ideas.
I'm very much looking forward to it, David, and I would just like to leave you with the goodbye expression of the Achwa. When the Achwa part from you, they say, "We are high." Think about that. We are high. That is Achwa for goodbye, so long, see you later. We are high.
Well, on that beautiful note, all I can say is good for them, and yeah, we're all high, John. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Take care.
Yes.